Hi everyone, welcome back to another edition of my videos. Today I wanted to show you another of my 30-minute games. This was today's game. It was a very quick game, which was great. I didn't have to do too much chess today, which was nice. But it was a very interesting game. It involved an opening that I've not played before, and I had quite an interesting game out of it as a result. So the game started with e4. Knight c6. So this is known as the Nimzowitsch defense. It comes up extremely rarely in my games. In fact, the last time I've played against the Nimzowitsch in a serious game was about 6 years ago. That just shows how uncommon it is. There's a number of ways I can play here. The main line gives white a good edge, but the positions are just really murky and really just weird. The positions you've probably never seen in your entire life. And, I didn't really want to play like that in a game because, unfortunately, black is then the one who's, you'd like to think has got better preparation in that line, and I don't want to play into his preparation. But there's a few other ways that you can play. I normally play knight f3, which is an invitation for black to go into a Philidor or back into the mainline position with e5. So either d6 entering a Philidor or e5 playing a more traditional black opening. The main line, I believe, goes d4. And there's a few weird ways black can play. I've played against one of them, which was e5, which is a really just strange line. The best move here is d takes e5. If you play d5, this is also fine too, but rather counterintuitive, this knight will come back to e7. And as I said, I've had this position before, and it's really weird. I actually ended up losing this game as white. Black actually has these really interesting pawn breaks with f5. You wouldn't expect it in this position because it looks like it weakens everything, but with this knight nicely placed over here, there's no potential attacks along the H to F diagonal against the king. So it's very, very fascinating positions. Another way that could happen is you could also have d5 here, and again there's these sort of positions. Again, they're just so murky. I mean, it's just all over the place. I wouldn't even think queen to d4 was the best move here. So again, it gives white a slight edge, it has to be said, after these moves. Interestingly enough, in the Grandmaster games, this position has been reached just around, let's see, 42 times, but there is actually quite a high draw percentage. You're looking at maybe 40% of the games being drawn from here. So interesting stuff, interesting stuff. Going back to what was actually played, I think another way of meeting the Nimzowitsch, and I think a much more traditional way, is playing knight to c3, so entering into what is known as the Vienna game. I mean, white can still play for some really tricky stuff with knight to f6 and still maintain his weirdness, but a much more traditional way, e5, which is what he played. So we're now into a Vienna game. I decided here to play the move f4. So this is known as the Vienna Gambit. A few years back, I actually had a teammate who played this a lot, and he had a lot of good results of it. It's, in my opinion, a much less risky King's Gambit, and it still allows for a lot of tricks and traps. And the worst case scenario, I think black still gets quite a good lead in development, and a good game for a cost of a pawn. So the most testing line is to just take on e takes on f4, which is what he did. I played knight to f3. And here my opponent played d6. It's not the most testing line. A much more testing line is the move g5, which is a much more audacious way of taking on, in sort of similar vein to most King's Gambit positions, so holding on to this pawn on f4, but also threatening to come to g4 to dislodge this knight. there's some interesting lines here. If I go d4, oops, sorry, d4, there's g4, and if I play bishop c4, trying to enter in what looks like a Museo Gambit, it doesn't quite work here, as this pawn can fall to this knight after a couple captures. This is a sort of favourable position for black. White is going to have to tuck his king into h1. So black just about survives in this position and actually ends up just a clear pawn up, which is well, is actually up about 1.4 according to the engine. So he's up in the material, but he still has to withstand a strong attack from white. So what he does with this king is going to be very, very interesting in the next few moves. But as I say, some very interesting games from there. So going back to the actual game, I played d4. So he played d6, I played d4. Oh, excuse me. And here g5 was played, so he had a sort of delayed g5, and I have a chessable study from this position which is interesting, and actually it says that white can actually get a good edge here. So after d5, knight to e5, this chess was, as I say, really likes this position for white, as it's really quite difficult now to hold on to this g5 pawn. Let's see why. So after bishop to b4, a little crafty check. Now the main move here is bishop to d7, and this has the idea, if I capture here, black has a bit of an awkward way of capturing this pawn. If he captures with the queen, which looks like the most obvious move, then I can capture this pawn on g5, and I'm up a pawn. I've got a good advantage in the position. So that's why black actually has to capture with either the knight or the king here. I think the knight is probably a little bit better. If you did capture the king, that's fine. Of course, the king is now trapped in the center. There's some interesting games and positions from here. I just will show you just very briefly. There's a game, in fact, from Joseph Gallagher, a British GM, against David Ledger, where Joseph Gallagher managed to win. That's an interesting line. A better move, I think, is the knight. It looks a bit awkward, but this clumsy-looking move, knight here, although this can be met with queen to d4. Black doesn't need to worry too much. He plays queen to f6. After a couple of trades, although I get the pawn here, it's actually not overly clear my advantage here. You know, he can capture back the pawn here on this move, and in actual fact, black has won quite a lot of the games from here. There have actually been a few draws as well, but there's not a single white win in this position. So it's certainly something to think about. Going back to the actual game, bishop to b5 check. He played c6. Now, interestingly enough, in my chessable study, it doesn't cover this move, which makes me suggest that it's perhaps not the most accurate move. And the engine gives us 2.1, so I had to kind of try and find how to win in this position, which is easier said than done. But thankfully, I managed to find the winning continuation here. So one of the things to consider. So very quickly, so I capture this pawn first. So you'll notice here there's a lot of different little tactics here. You know, there's potential traps on this f7 square, but also this rook on a8 is a little bit loose. So with that in mind, I capture the knight here on e5. If he takes this knight here, I'm doing quite well in this position. I can capture with the bishop, and then that forks both the king and the rook. So his only other move is to really capture this bishop. And now this unlocks this threat now. So I've actually got a double threat going along here. So hitting this king on f7, threatening checkmate, but also the rook on a8. So he played bishop to e6, trying to hold on to everything. So now the queen, it holds here, and this bishop protects this pawn, so it looks like a really good move. And it was funny, I didn't really think I was winning in this position. If I turn on the engine, you'll see here that white is winning by 4.1. It is a crushing win here, but I don't really quite see the way to win this at this point. Nonetheless, I played queen to c6, so with the threat now still of this rook, and notice this knight is guarding this square. Bishop d7, knight takes on d7, and I was analysing this position for quite some time because I was looking at what happens after rook to c8. So it looks as though black is going to regain this knight. What I was looking at was this variation with queen takes on b5 after queen takes, capturing another pawn over here. This was the line I was looking at. It's still winning for white, but it's not the most accurate way of playing. The much better move is actually knight to f6 with a double check, getting out of all danger. If the king comes forward, knight to f to d5 with check again, king e6, and then capturing here. And you'll notice this is much better for white because the knight has managed to escape unscathed. White is up in material, and black's king is horribly placed, and it's going to be really difficult to develop these pieces to good squares. I'll just show you an example line. I mean, obviously white is up materially, but I had a look at some ideas here. I mean, this is just totally winning now for white. He's up a clear. I think it's 2 pieces. No, it's 1 piece, and I think a couple pawns and change. So he's doing very well. Going back to the game. So rather surprisingly, he played queen takes on d7 here now, and that just allowed me to take the rook, king move forward, knight to d5 check, which was a nice move, king to e6, and then I captured here on f8. So totally winning position now. Black, whatever he moves, he is going to be losing, so here's a couple plans. And at this point, black just resigned. So really nice game, really cool miniature. Going through some interesting stuff in the Vienna Gambit. Hopefully I'll get another position like this. But otherwise, have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.